Let's see here. My name is Yano. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Marketability Games, which doesn't really mean much because the first game we released under this company was Spire, and that was made by two people.
What did you like? If I can ask, what did you learn from your job as QA that you incorporated later into when you started making games?
I feel like a lot of I've started as QA in my job. I'm still like technically QA, and I feel it's one of the most missing aspects in a lot of games. And I feel like since you came up from, then that may have influenced the development in a way.
Yeah, that's fair. I agree. QA lets you know that nobody knows what they're doing.
Yeah.
To put it bluntly, you just can't design a perfect product. It's like if you build a rocket, the first rocket you build is just gonna not work. Like it's not even gonna crash and explode. It's probably not even gonna, like launch. In that way, QA is, I guess, it's taught me that like everybody being wrong and writing wrong code, writing bad architecture, writing buggy video games, it's just a normal part of the process. Both Anthony and I have QA backgrounds. I did the game testing and QA work at Microsoft for a pretty long time. That was my college job. And then out of college, I worked at Amazon as a quality assurance engineer. And why I worked at Amazon instead of games is because games doesn't pay. So QA jobs for games pays pretty much nothing, pretty much minimum wage. And people are looked down upon pretty severely, so people don't try very hard. It's a very different atmosphere. I think the salary range is already like triple to quadruple of what it would be in the game industry. And you get to work more closely with like the developer who's actually working on it. You write test plans, you find out where things break, and even like the programmers would like review your test plans to make sure that like when they write their bad code, because they're going to write bad code, where it's going to break. And then you just kind of learn more and more about how things break over time. And you just know about it ahead of time. And even if you know how it's going to break, you still can't prevent it from happening. That's what you really learn, I guess.
You learned that like everything's built broken, basically.
Yeah. And there's also different levels of testing. There's like a pyramid of like testing that is cheap, and is pretty effective. There's testing that is very expensive and finds a lot of things. There's testing that is extraordinarily expensive, but helps very little. Like there's like a ratio for every kind of testing, like unit tests, pipeline tests. There's like different names for them, but I'm not very awake, so I can't think of them right away. But manual testing is considered like kind of like expensive, and the quality differs quite a bit depending on the firm as well and how much experience the person has doing the testing, especially just like standard manual testing for like functional behavior.
What would you say is like the most, I don't know, I'm assuming each one is game by game scenario, which one helps the most and doesn't help the most. But you've done like far more QA than I anticipated. Is there one that you saw often that was important and overlooked?
I would say the most important is probably just the most basic manual testing. It's like testing freeform, and then I think writing good bugs and putting your opinion about what a bug is and isn't. So like if a game crashes, that's very clearly a bug. But if you open a menu and it goes up, it goes back down, and then goes up, it's like that's a bug too. But the game isn't like, it doesn't like crash, or like the color is like a little off. Like somebody's like, oh, take my purple sword, and it's like it's kind of red. Like it doesn't look very purple. Like those kind of fuzzier bugs. Just learning about the importance of those kinds of bugs is very interesting, and I think those are pretty important bugs. And once you are too good at writing bugs, you kind of have a lot of spare time, and your bugs start to get strange. It's just like, this sword does too much damage. Like you start having opinions about the game.
That happened.
So
how often did you bring in new playtesters?
you're talking about Kleenex testers. Kleenex testers are also very, very important. Problem is, there's a lot of different important QA and testing. So when I say I think this one's the most important, I think I come from a place where I think that it is the type of testing that is missing most often in the games industry. But it doesn't mean that it is like, if you just have this, it will work out. You still have to do every type of testing. But it's compat testing, lots of different monitors and configurations, different types of hardware, accessibility testing, which is like just an entire subset of its own, making sure that it works for all sorts of different types of, like vision, controller stuff, reflex things, And it's just I think Kleenex testing is also extremely important. We do it quite often. Currently for our new unannounced project, every time we have a playtest session, I guess not really a playtest session, every time we spin up a new build for our playtesters, we try to also invite 1 or 2 people every week or every 2 weeks. So they've never played it before. And generally when we invite people, we ask that we watch while they play their first time. And then we can identify kind of like first time user experience type of issues, make sure they understand the rules immediately, how the game works immediately, like what is clear and what isn't. So that is definitely super important in the prototype phase. And then once you start smoothing out kind of like the initial tutorial kind of like work, it becomes less important over time, but it's pretty important for at least 2 years, which is pretty long, but it depends on how complex your game's rules are. But for a game like Slay, that's quite important. There's just too many systems. So, but if you're making a game in a genre that you already understand or everybody understands, then it's not as important, but it's still, you have to do it at least 5 times, minimum 5 times, preferably 50 times. If you have like a QA, if you have the same person on a game for a long time, they just become a very different type of tester. And that's extremely valuable to take a game, not even just a game, but like a product from working and not breaking to like exceptional. And so we try to get as much testers that are on the same product as long as possible. And I think that's a very key part of why it feels like a game that people have played and updated even before like really playing for the first time for most people, because we had playtesters on Spire for 1.5 years before we launched into early access. So yeah.
I have a specific question, just like, I don't know, my mind goes to what I'm thinking about currently in my development, but you're doing most of your playtesting online, right?
Yes.
And on my game right now, like we are doing the system where we invite new playtesters around every build and try to get that first time user experience and also that veteran experience. But we've had a couple of playtesters that are like a lot even that disappear. It's like they're not interacting with us anymore. And I feel like that's, I mean, not really interact. I feel like they answer, but they don't really play the game anymore. And I feel like I'd like to ask if that happened to you and what you made of it, because I feel like that's a portion of playtesting that could be missed, like why people stop playing the game. That's
a good point. We don't really ask why people stop playing. More like if people do keep playing, we're like, oh, like what do you like about it? It's like those are kind of like complex questions because they're so multifaceted, right? Like the reason somebody could start playing, keep playing, and stop playing are very complex questions. They could be like personal life events, but they could be lying to you to be polite. We try to eliminate that kind of human element from our tests as much as possible. So if we ask extremely open-ended questions, it can be difficult to ascertain what the motive behind what they're saying. And it could just be being nice, because politeness is a huge thing in our society. I think it's a good thing, but it's not very good for getting good data to improve your game. So when people stop playing our games, we're not really sure, we're not 100% sure why. So there are some elements that are just very, very difficult to understand. It could just not be a game for them. Maybe the flow doesn't feel right. Maybe there's not enough content left. Not sure. Who knows?
Can I ask how, like, we've gotten really in depth about QA, but I'll ask you, like, how much of the game do you playtest and how often do you playtest each section? Like, I'm assuming that you can get vision locked yourself when you're just focusing on one section for a while.
I see. We're kind of lucky in that we made a roguelike because we just play one session. And then, so what happens often is that Anthony and I would both play, as in one person would play and the other person would watch, and then we'd be discussing the game as we play. So we have this kind of like play, kind of like streaming to one person and talking about it with one person. We do that kind of play test quite often, like once a week or once every 2 weeks. Not as much as I'd like to. I remember on Spire, we probably did that once a month or so, but our playtest channel was very, very active. If it wasn't very active, we probably would have done more playtest just to make sure that the new things that we add are incorporated correctly, balanced right, and we feel good about it. But currently at our small studio for the new project, we do what's called team playtest each week. So one person, we just choose like random. It's like round robin, but it's pretty random. And then they stream it and play it, and everyone else is kind of just like writes bugs, thoughts. We have like a side discussion at the same time. And Yeah, so pretty often, I guess once a week. And once a week feels like it doesn't feel like enough, but at the same time, we need to make a video game. So it's tough. It's a tough balance. Currently at our small studio for the new project, we do what's called team playtest each week. So one person we just choose like random. It's like round robin, but it's pretty random. And then they stream it and play it, and everyone else is kind of just like writes bugs, thoughts. We have like a side discussion at the same time. And yeah, so pretty often, I guess once a week. And once a week feels like it doesn't feel like enough, but at the same time, we need to make a video game. So it's tough. It's a tough balance.
And I'm writing timestamps for good moments.
I have a question about like just for the record, I've played. I mean, you said earlier that something about making players fun, like happy, and made me think that I've like played Slay the Spire for like 600 hours, and I've been very happy. And I wanted to ask about like not as in a bad way, but Slay the Spire is like extremely addictive. What would you say went into making it that addictive?
I see. What makes the game addictive? That's a very complex question. I'm not really a big fan of
I'm saying
hard
like
games.
in the development process, what are the elements that made it like that way?
I see. I mean, it's hard for me to say exactly because I don't get to play it and experience the same like emotional journey of becoming hyper invested into the game. It's just impossible just because I made the game. There's a lot of things about other games that I feel make me stop playing those games, and I wanted to each time I run into those kind of issues, I kind of try to like design a solution in my mind. One of them is that there's not an ever increasing challenge. Once there's no more challenges for me to do in a game, I just stop playing. Generally, when you get all the achievements in a game, it's kind of like, I guess I finished the game. And so I was like, oh, we should add a system that makes it more endless and more difficult over time. And for some reason, in our release timeline, our release roadmap, we said there's going to be an endless mode. And in my mind, that's what I was thinking of what endless meant. Was like, you can keep playing the game, not you keep playing one run forever. And Anthony just wrote endless because he thought in roguelike games, everybody expected an endless mode where they're like, oh, how far can I take this single deck? That was not what I was thinking at all. So I was like, I have a proposition for an endless mode, Anthony. And so I like made this big document about the Ascension system. And I sent it over, and he was like, "This sounds great. Like, what's this for?" And I was like, "What do you mean? It's for the endless mode." He's like, "I don't think that's what people think endless mode is." So I was like, "Well, I think this is a great system, and I want to test it out. So I'm just gonna implement it." So I implemented it, and then we made an endless mode as well, because Anthony thought that wouldn't placate some of the people who thought that's what endless mode was, and that mode kind of sucks. So we just kind of hit it under like custom mode. In terms of people playing for a long time, I think that's one of the things that makes people play more than just like beating the game with all characters. There's like a little bit more, right? It's like a little bit harder, like, and it's like this it's like competitive, even though it's a single player game.
Yeah, you're competing against your past self. It's awesome.
Exactly. You're competing against yourself too. And then you kind of remember emotionally how you did it. And you beat it again, and you're like, this time it was easy. Like, am I getting better? Like, there's only one way to find out. We just keep playing. And then so that's one factor. And the other factor that I spent a lot of time studying is removing friction from video games. And it's like very, very difficult to define what that means. There are a lot of elements. One is the game is very easy to obtain and run. So that would be the game size is small. It runs relatively quickly, And even like if there is like a logo splash, an unskippable logo splash adds an incredible amount of friction to me. Like I remember about a year and a half ago, I played the new Forza game, and it's like I have to open the Xbox, whatever, Xbox Game Pass. So that's not like an auto startup for me. So I have to open that. I click on the Forza thing. If I have to download it, it's like 50 gigabytes or whatever. It opens. There's like 10 million credits. It like asks me to sign something. It's like look at these new promotions. You got a new car. It's like I don't want that. Like that's not what I want. It's like when you wake up, you just want your coffee. You don't want your coffee to tell you how awesome it is. You don't want it to give you advertisements. You don't want it to change. You just want to drink your coffee. Like you want it to be made exactly the same way. You want it to taste the same way. And it's a little different though, you know? You can never always make the coffee the same way. And it's like, and you enjoy your coffee. It's kind of like, I want a comfortable game. And so Spire, you just run the game. The very top option is continue or new game. You're like, I want to play Slay the Spire. I want it to feel comfortable. And then I want to run the game. You start it, you go. There's the speed and transition time between every menu option is like pretty much zero. It's like all visual. You just go. But
What else created friction in your playtesting and stuff that you smoothed out?
oh my gosh, we talk about words all the time. I mean, language is a very complex thing, as you probably. I mean, that's like language is kind of the reason we have wars. Like that's how bad it is, I think. So descriptions we spend an incredible amount of time fixing. Friction would be like a button being too small, a transition being too long, the sound effect not being the right pitch. It's just like everything that makes the game like a little bit more unpleasant, we have to like smooth out. It's like wrinkles in the carpets. That kind of feedback, unless you specifically point out examples of those kinds of issues existing in the game, your playtesters will likely not point it out. Especially if they're like friend playtesters who are not professionals. They will not know to be like, is this worth bringing up? Like, is it worth bringing up that like this button just appears instead of like flies in smoothly? And the answer is no, they will not tell you. They don't, generally when you play a game and you think about filing feedback, you're kind of thinking about it from a macro level. But I'm extremely nitpicky. So whenever somebody is like, how many bugs could this game have? I'm just like infinity. Like there's infinite bugs. Like I don't know why you would say that. Like the padding between the text on a single button can be a bug. Like the shadow could be like too dark. You know, it's infinity. Like you forget anti-aliasing on like one specific UI element. It pops up pretty obviously to me when that happens. So I guess those are like some friction points. Even like the speed of which like a pause screen opens and closes. Like you're playing something, you get interrupted. You just press escape, and then you press save and exit. You just muscle memory just quit the game too.
I wanted to ask you about your relationship with Anthony. Like,
Mm-hmm.
do you have hierarchy? Like, who makes the decisions? What happens if you don't? Like, if you disagree?
I see. Oh, we disagree all the time, as you might expect. We don't have a hierarchy, which is why a game takes a long time to make, to be honest. But it also means that nobody is ever unhappy with the final result, even if one is considered worse or better, or you disagree ultimately. I think we just know that we're fair to each other. And sometimes we would just be like A or B, and then we would like state our case, and we just have to pick one at the end of the day. But we're both very pragmatic, so we know that it has to be done, and that's pretty important. And ultimately, you just have to always act in good faith, and always believe the other person is acting in good faith. You just need a level of trust, and if you don't have trust, then you're going to say yes but not mean yes, and then you're just gonna have ill feelings over time, and you don't want to ever build that up. Like Anthony and I have very, very, very few like conflicts when working on the game. And I thought that was normal, but apparently it is not normal. People have humongous catastrophic problems all the time. So we currently work in a co-working office, And sometimes, so the company below us, they have two CEOs as well. And sometimes they would get into screaming matches. And that's actually fine because A, they're young and they're silly. But B, at the end of the day, when they cool down, they still make a decision. It's better to directly confront a problem, in my opinion, than kind of like let it fester. You just have to be honest, even if it. But I mean, you shouldn't really scream if you have other like employees in your vicinity. You should probably peacefully talk it out. It's just a funny example of just like seeing it in action from like younger developers, but it's pretty important to be honest, I guess is all I'm trying to say. Which is just sounds like common sense when I say it, so it's kind of stupid, but there was just a lack of finesse, a lack of polish. We didn't do much play testing. We just kind of made content. So we made bullet points of things we wanted to do. And we technically did those. We technically accomplished everything that was in the design document, but at the lowest quality bar in a sense, if that makes sense. It's like we just need a boss. And it's like, what's the boss do? It has like 3 attack patterns, and it should be hard. Like it just says hard boss. It's like this is the final boss. It has to be hard. And you play it and it's hard, and you're like, okay. You don't really think about like whether it's fair or not fair, or whether the bullets from the enemy reads well or doesn't read well. You just kind of meet those requirements, and that's something that happens pretty often. I'm not going to go into whether that happens to developers today when you tell like your programmers to implement something and they get it done technically what's on paper, but there's a lot of little fidgeting you can do to make it kind of like special, if that makes sense.
Maybe it's because of early access, but I feel like gameplay wise, the game came out like super tight in a lot of ways. It feels like every card did get like the attention, and every event kind of got the attention it deserved. Or would you say otherwise? I don't know.
Yeah, I would say we did a pretty good job. We were also in internal playtest for like I think I said previously, but we were internally playtesting for a very long time before we released. So, and that helps a lot. I think making a roguelike game helped us do that. So the previous games, I guess plural, were like arcade games or kind of like a pretty straightforward campaign game. But a roguelike game, to do any kind of playtest, you have to play the whole thing. So it helps maintain quality because you get to experience the whole thing, and then you're just trying to improve the whole thing at the same time, all the time.
When were just a weird question, but when were the 3 acts made? Like before, I guess, the finish line. When did you have 3 acts already in place?
I see. We released the game with 2.5 acts, and I think Act 1 and Act 2 didn't have 3 bosses. So in terms of when they were 100% complete, when we released early access, technically none of the acts were complete. We just didn't feel like there was enough stuff. But we were also like, kind of like don't want to work on a game for 3 or 4 years, and like if it's not fun, then it's going to be really, really dangerous for us to keep working on a game this long. So we're very fortunate that early access exists. Back then it did not exist. So I think as developers in general, we have considerably more control over what we make, how we make it. We have a larger audience. We have better systems for getting feedback.
If you would have released the game today, do you think you would have still released it like in early access?
Yeah, I think so. Well, barring the circumstances, I was starting to get worried about how much money I had left. So I was like, we should release something to the public that might be able to, that people can pay for. It's pretty important. Early access, it helps and doesn't help. So in one way, you can trap yourself, especially as a new developer. I think you can be very optimistic about what you are making and be sure that you're going to make something. But but that's usually not the case. You might overpromise. You might make promises that you can't keep. If you're not in early access, you don't have any customers. It doesn't matter, right?
Yeah.
Another one is you just have to be releasing things all the time. One of the main things we noticed for early access developers is they would be like, we'll be working on XYZ, but then they would make no announcements for like 3 months at a time. And everybody would start, there was like a certain breaking point where if one person says, why aren't the devs giving us updates? Then everybody goes, why aren't the devs giving us updates? And then it just gets, and if you don't read that one post, it would just like spiral out of control. And everyone would be like, dead game. And then it would reach outside of Steam, and like the forums and like social media. Everyone would just be like, this game is dead. Developer hasn't said anything. But like most developers, they're just always, it's just like, it's a job, you're always working on the game. It's
How
just the lack
often-
of communication is a pain.
How often would you say it's necessary or important to like update an early access game?
I
Give
would
a
say as
community
long
update, I
as
think.
I think you have to communicate how often you're going to give updates, and you have to follow that schedule like very, very seriously. We updated once a week, which I don't think is good. I think it's
That's
too much.
intense. Yeah, that's a lot.
Yeah, we release patch notes every single week, and you can still find them today. Like you can just go into the past and just look at our updates. We literally call them like weekly patch and then a number for like what number of patch it was. So it's pretty clear that we were patching weekly. And I don't recommend weekly because if you release a patch, prepping the patch takes time. Releasing the patch, you have to make sure it goes through properly and propagates. And then if there are any problems, immediately you kind of have to babysit a patch, right? If you worked in any kind of development job, programming job, then you know that if you release something, it's like you're like on monitoring, you're on call, you're like, I hope it goes well, and that mindset of is something gonna go wrong? Like feeling that way for like the next 48 hours is always pretty stressful. So that happened every single weekend for a year and a half. So.
Would you release a game into early access if it wasn't, if it was like you released a roguelike, or sorry, I haven't played Slay the Spire. Everyone's been telling you to
That's
play
fine.
it.
It's a good game.
Usually, early access is good for games that are either you can replay them a lot, like Hades or Slay the Spire, or multiplayer games like I think Phasmophobia was in early access for a while. Games with a lot of replay value.
Yes.
Would you have released? I don't know what your next project is, but if it's not like something with high replay value, would you have released it into early access?
I don't think we would have, to be honest. That's my take. I think Kleenex testing, like first-time play testers, is extremely important for games that are like linear, as we'll say, like story from start to finish. That's like a very different type of game. And a lot of my advice will not work for those kinds of like games. So I'm not sure. I actually brought up the same question when I was at GDC for a game called Subnautica. And because they were in early access, and it's an open world survival crafting game. I think open world survival crafting games, that is a long genre name, by the way. They're more open-ended, and there's a lot of gameplay to do. So it's not as linear as the developers probably thought. But I think in general, games that are extremely linear, if we think of like kind of like cookie cutter AAA games, I don't want to say cookie cutter because that means they're not creative, which is false. Games like Control are very creative, in terms of like storytelling, what you can do.
Remedy is insanely creative. Like,
yeah. So
it's one of the most
those, but like not many people are going to replay them over and over again, and that's something that you have to really think about. And I would probably just try to get a new playtester in pretty frequently to test, and you have to just kind of watch somebody play from start to finish. Or if you release a new thing, you're like, oh, the new thing is added. Can we watch somebody play the new chapter or whatever? You have to think of a different type of framework for testing for sure. It's just a very different thing. Roguelikes just have a humongous advantage in terms of like QA, but also means, there's also the matrix of complexity, so things can break as well. So, pros and cons.
Do you have any
Yeah.
tips for students who, like, let's say they'll get to a point where they're interacting with a community? Like, how do you interact with a community?
How do you interact with the community? Oh, that's a tough one. That's a whole subset of development. We generally listen, but don't. We acknowledge, but we don't say we're going to do anything. So we're very non-committal, and it's because even if you are 100% sure that you should commit to somebody's like suggestion or idea or bug fix, once you actually get to fixing it, it might not be true. We think about language, as we said, even for cards all the time, but also for our announcements. I wrote every single announcement. And we just kind of reveal new things and don't really say like, oh, we're going to do XYZ. It's like we're working on XYZ is kind of the language that we use often. Interacting with the community though, my goodness. I mean, it's not good to be like completely vacant. You don't want to be like never responding to anything and you're just like this enigmatic machine that churns something out sometimes. Which could be good if you're making a game that's like that, perhaps. If you are somebody who made like, I don't know, it's not really possible to make Portal as a single person, but if someone made a cerebral puzzle game, you can just kind of like release it and just like make like a weird description and just like now it's out there. But in general, we're quite vocal. We talk a lot about stuff. We have a Discord. Interacting with the community, it differs per community, so that's something important to note. We interact very differently based on if it's the Steam forums and announcements, the comment section of every single announcement. We have like a subreddit. We interact very differently in the subreddit. We have a Discord. We interact in a different way in our Discord. So,
what changes between those platforms?
What changes? I see. Let's see here. What changes? Since some of them are not made for discussions, you can't really have a back and forth, and that just naturally changes how you talk with people. So for Reddit and Steam, we generally are very like apologetic and neutral, like customer service, because there are much more international customers or just people who are just kind of crazy, to be honest. Steam is like insane. I don't know what it is about Steam, but the discussions are like very like entitled and unsympathetic and like just cruel. And so you just kind of want to talk in a very like professional, like not personal tone.
Cruel is like I want to explore cruel.
Like, you want to explore cruel?
Yeah, what's cruel?
Like, what are these devs doing? I hope they just like what is this shit update? Or they just be like shit update and just like post like a meme and just like get out of there, right? It's just like they're just like heartless human beings. They're just children. And you just have to know that like it's like, oh, okay, this is where the psychopaths live. Like this is where they are. They're not here to interact with anybody. They think they're enacting change by being cruel to developers. And Steam can't do anything about that either, just because there's just so much games and so much comments. There's no way for them to do anything. They made moderation tools, but because of the precedent that's been set historically, it's just impossible to change. So you just have to know that when people interact with you on Steam, the Steam discussions and the comments page, it's going to be very strange. You're going to have a mixed bag of people being like, hey, like my game is not working on iOS. Like, why is that in here in Steam? Like, this is the Steam version of the game. Like, I don't get it. That kind of stuff happens all the time. Someone would just be like, it's YouTube comments, it's like, first, we're like, oh, I love this game. Like, this person's like positive, negative, not even on topic. It's just like pure chaos. Reddit has a strong moderation kind of like thing. It's pretty important that moderators exist and maintain a set of rules. I don't think there's like technically rules in like the discussions. Like we have like a pinned thing about rules, but nobody tends to follow them on Steam for some reason. So it's just madness. So we're always like, oh, like sorry you had this problem. You know, we'll try to maybe we'll think about fixing it. I don't know. We'll see how it goes. We just kind of acknowledge problems and don't really promise anything on Steam. Or if we have an absolute fix, we have copy and paste kind of like support responses. So that's how we interact on Steam. On Reddit, there's a lot of like jokes and memes. It's kind of like people who are already into the game are discussing the game and making jokes, and people are talking about jokes. And those are the ones that surface to the top because of Reddit's voting system, right? So it's fine to just be like, kind of like just silly, and it's fine. If there's a meme, you'd be like, then as a developer, you can like make the meme funnier.
What would you say is the most overlooked part in development?
Overlooked part in development. I mean, probably QA. Generally QA. There's a lot of developers that come from tech. This is why you get into computer science because you want to make video games. You find out you can't get a job in the games industry, so you work in big tech. You work in big tech for a while, you quit, and then you make video games.
Classic story.
So,
Heard it like twice
story, right?
already, I think.
So there's a lot of programmers, and they're like, I can just make the whole game. All I need to do is make the game. And then you just, over time, you just kind of forget that when you worked at the tech company, there was a QA staff, and they were preventing you from fucking everything up. But when you work for yourself and you're making an indie game, you forget that over time. You get lost in the sauce. You're making the game, you're excited, you got art, you got music. And then you're like, do I really need QA? I'm really good at my job. I don't need QA. And then it just doesn't even work, you know? And you just forget that that whole system of people existed to prevent that specifically from happening. But you just can't do that because you just kind of just took it for granted, I think. QA is taken for granted in the tech industry, even in the tech industry, just like games especially. They're like, testers, they're a dime a dozen. Everyone wants to play games and test games. In the tech industry, it's like QA is not like, it's not as important as programmers. Programmers make the thing. And so QA is always like looked down on. And it was actually a huge struggle, even when I worked at Amazon. Programmers would very constantly treat QA very poorly or look down on them or feel they're less important. And I pushed very, very hard when I worked at Amazon to try to get a lot of our QA staff to sit in on like architectural meetings for like programming. I like to be fly on the wall. Fly on the wall is like just like kind of being there while they're having like sprint planning. It's like if the QA knows what's coming, they can plan for it and test for it and do things. And you can't just make a thing and send it off to a team and be like, please find anything wrong. That's just not how it works. You have to tightly integrate QA into the development process. Otherwise, they're not going to know what is going to break. They're not going to be able to sense what the risks are coming on. So
yeah, we have
not having that kind of system at all is very, very dangerous. I think a good game is something that pushes game design forward, if that makes sense. It's not like novelty. You don't just do things for the sake of novelty. It's like, oh, this is how games might look in the future. Like kind of playing a lot of games and making games, you as a developer feel like you should make something that pushes games as a medium a little bit closer to, I don't know, maybe there's the perfect game out there in the 10,000 years from now, but taking one step closer to that kind of like perfect genre, or maybe even exploring a new genre. And there's like a ton of games like this. I think one of them that is starting to develop and doesn't really exist yet is like extraction shooters, for example, like Escape from Tarkov. I think there's a lot of interesting things there. I certainly don't think Escape from Tarkov is the best extraction type gameplay that we're gonna play during our lifetimes. If somebody says that to me, I would be like, I don't think so. I think there's gonna be something better. So whenever you make a game that improves any genre of game forward even just a tiny bit, that's like a good game, in my opinion, from like a game design perspective. Like that's what you want to be doing. You don't want to copy and paste the game and be like, aha, I made something. Like you're just in it for the money. What do I think makes it marketable?
Yeah, I feel like Slay the Spire is an interesting example, because the art is not as flashy as you would like expect of a game today. It doesn't necessarily pass off in a GIF. There's some like general marketing strategies that have been put out on the internet, and it still worked very well. So
let's see, a game that is marketable. So if we start from the word market, no, there's like classic marketing, which is like if you do something called a SWOT analysis, that's like classic marketing. So that's like the very basic minimum that you should do, which is like, this genre is like oversaturated or not. This genre is growing, et cetera, et cetera. In terms of like breaking out and making like a hit game, I would say you need two big things. And that is you need aesthetic distinction. So it has to be visually distinct from everything that exists. So, and it has to have its own identity. So that's pretty important. Like it can look good, but if it looks similar to other good looking things, you're going to be compared to those other things. Like you have to be the best in how it looks. And Slay the Spire doesn't really look like anything. So it's not compared to anything. So we try to bypass that. I think this is pretty similar to what's called the blue ocean strategy. And that's when you try to make something that is very distinct from what exists. Like Nintendo has this strategy because they make consoles that are not as powerful as Xbox or PlayStation, right? But they have something that makes them distinct. You don't really compare the Nintendo Switch to anything else because nothing else like it existed before. So
yeah, but Nintendo also does this with their unique art style and stuff like that. They have a very like personal identity of anything.
Exactly. So like Mario's, it runs on like I don't know if you know how strong the Switch is. It is like really, really shitty. It's like very slow. And it looks so good still because of their aesthetic identity. It's so important. So that's important. So visuals. And then the other one is the gameplay. Just gameplay. You need some novelty, but for me, I would say if you want to market it, unfortunately, this is kind of a hot take, but you just need to have a game that has a good return on investment for the customer. So, it's like a $10 game, but you can get like 30 hours of like stuff out of it. And it's
why is this a hot take? It makes
it's nobody wants to hear it, okay? Like on Twitter, as you say, you're like, oh, your game has to be 30 hours. Then somebody who's making an artsy game will be like, not every game. I'm not trying to say every game has to be that. But if you want to make a living, if you want to make a living and you want to like actually have people buy your game and then tell other people that it's like good things to buy and play, then you should really consider like making a game that has long-term replay value, or it's just long game. So it's possible to make a game that is short and is very good, of course. Like we all know that. There's all sorts of games that are short and fantastic, but the value proposition is much harder for people. And I have a pretty direct answer usually, is like I'm not like an artistic visionary. Anthony and I consider myself utilitarian. So I try to make the most happiness for players. That's my goal, is to make something that makes the most people happy with the resources that we have. So we try to reach as much people as we can. We try to make them have a good time. We don't waste their time. We try to make what we consider is happiness, which is like compelling and complex like gameplay, and you can replay it and it's fun. You can talk to people about it. So that's our take, I guess.
Do you have any tips for students heading into the games industry, or for students looking to build their own studio?
Build their own studio. I don't know if a student should be building their own studio.
That's a good. That's something that's good to hear, I guess.
That's very brave. treat people well, I guess. Just tips for getting into the game industry. So the joke to me is that I'm not really in the games industry per se. I'm just an independent person making something. Like I'm not somebody's employee, right? I didn't apply for anything. I just kind of started making games. So I kind of just bypassed all of that in a sense. I guess I started my own studio. It's a 2-person company. Generally, the advice is to be financially stable, because if you are not financially stable, then you will make a lot of creative blunders. You will start to think that what you need to do to make money and to make it, you have to implement X, Y, Z, bad practices, things like that. And I think ultimately it can make you a bad person and make bad games. So you'll lose on 2 fronts. You'll become a terrible human being if you try to get more and more money out of your products and then justify it to yourself by saying you have to survive. And then B, you're going to be making those bad games, and then you are going to be creatively bankrupt. And it's not good to just make those games, because the games that make a lot of money and people assume make money are kind of like psychological traps, and they have a lot of dark patterns. So you should try to avoid those as much as possible. And I would much rather see a lot of game developers start off working at even like a software company, not even games related. There's just a lot of overlap in those industries. If you want to get into animation, you can work as like an animation assistant. You don't have to be in the games industry. And I think it's actually better if you don't work in the games industry at the start, in my opinion. You just get to see the world from a different perspective, and you can add on more to a project if you come from a different place. I would say see the world. It's pretty important to see the world.
I have a final question.
I think I have 2 more questions. Eli, you said you had a question?
I want the final question.
Okay, you'll get the final question.
Okay.
Now it's time for my question, the last question.
Yeah.
How do you slay the Spire?
How do you slay the Spire? Well, you see, I don't know if you can. I don't know. It's not really a metaphor. It's just a silly name for the game.
It's a funny name.
Maybe we'll find out in the future. Even as somebody who made the game, I don't really know how to slay the Spire. But we just wanted to give a very nonsensical game title. Because roguelikes need what is it called? It's called a motivator. I call them motivators. And it's like, what are you trying to accomplish when you play the game? And if anybody asks, then it's funny because the title is called Slay the Spire. Like, I mean, obviously you're trying to slay the Spire. Duh. I mean, you're killing the heart of the Spire. Is that slaying it? I don't know. It's too deep for me.
Yeah. Anyway, that's nice.
That was a good final question.